Hi, Jacob.
Hi, Ann.
Well, welcome to Blogging Heads. This is your first appearance on the show, isn't it?
You know, it's been a while. I have been on before,
you have
but
been
not
on.
in the past year or two.
Oh, well, cool. So you're here. You're Jacob Weisberg of Palinisms, Bushisms, and Slate magazine. Am I right?
That's me.
Anything more you would like to say about that?
Those are good credit lines.
Okay, and I'm Ann Althouse of Blogging Heads, a frequent contributor, and the blog Althouse, and the University of Wisconsin Law School. So you have a new book, Palinisms, and I guess a lot of people are familiar with these from Slate and familiar with Bushisms as well. But why write books like this? What's the thought behind this?
Well, there's a jokey part of it and a serious part of it. I mean, the jokey part of it obviously is to just collect these goofy things that politicians say, and I consider this part of the great American tradition of making fun of political leaders, which I think is very healthy. And just by doing it, you underscore the freedom we have as Americans to mock our political leaders, which is, of course, a freedom denied in many parts of the world.
I agree. We should mock the hell out of them. But why would you go from Bushisms to Palinisms as opposed to Obamisms? I mean, she's not president. You might be trying to fend her off. But if you went from Bushisms to Palinisms, why not pick on the most powerful people as opposed to someone who doesn't even have a job, apparently, except writing on Facebook and Twitter and going around talking to people? Why not go after the truly powerful people like Obama?
Well, it's a fair question. And I know it does look possibly ideological. The problem is other people don't say things that are consistently funny. I mean, all politicians slip up. We've tried to collect just about everyone who does in Slate. I mean, we did John Kerry back when we were doing Bush. We did Bidenisms. Bidenisms are the closest. But there actually are not very many politicians who say things that are not only accidental, but make you laugh. I mean, Bush was really the master of it.
Bush was perfect for that. I mean, he did have an odd way of putting things, and so did his father. I think. Do you think that there's something in like brain science that would discover why some people have an odd syntax or don't seem to speak like ordinary people? Do you think there's some kind of maybe learning disability, a little like dyslexia or something like that? I mean, I know that's what's distinctive about Palin. It sometimes seems disjointed or odd to people, or not like a normal way of speaking. Do you think that there's something that science might be able to identify that causes some people to have idiosyncratic syntax?
Yeah, I mean, with the Bush family, as you point out, I think there probably was something genetic, although father and son slipped up in kind of different ways. With the younger Bush, it did seem like some kind of dyslexia-like disability, a language processing problem of some kind. Bush didn't have any problem reading from the teleprompter, so it doesn't look like it was dyslexia. But there's some kind of undiagnosed, maybe not even defined problem there. But that sort of makes it less funny, right? I mean, then you're making fun of, it'd be like making fun of FDR for being in a wheelchair. I mean, but if you want to ask why,
bad about it.
I do feel a little bad about it. And if it weren't so funny, I wouldn't do it. But I think that's probably true with Bush. With Palin, I don't get that exactly. I mean, she does have this weirdly jumbled syntax, but with her, it feels a little more like not fully successful improvisation, where she starts saying something and doesn't really, it's more of a substantive issue. She doesn't know what she's going to say, and so she sort of stalls and moves things around in the sentence, kind of hoping that, it'll come to her before she's done talking.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do that, but I think Obama does it too. I mean, Obama just does it in a way that's a lot less funny, that will kind of bore you to death. In a way that's, I mean, he was a professor or something akin to a professor, and I've heard a lot of professors speak, and I think there's something sort of maddening, and it isn't funny at all. It's irritating.
It's sort of ponderous, yeah. And he, I mean, Obama does have this, he's very cautious, and it's this very, careful way of speaking where you're kind of thinking through every word before you utter it. He says there's a notion that some people have that, it's just this sort of professorial style. Yeah. I agree with you. It's a little like, I mean, John Kerry was, of course, much, much worse, the sort of ponderous, wordy style. Yeah. But the problem was, and we did a thing in Slate for a while where we diagrammed Kerry's sentences, and the first time you did it, it was hilarious, and it got less funny every time. And then you're just collecting somebody's run-on sentences. And so that's the thing. I mean, I'll give you another example. I mean, the late Richard J. Daley, the mayor of Chicago, made these accidental statements that were really funny, So that's the sweet spot. And I will be the first to acknowledge I don't think Palin's are as funny as Bush's, but that's a high standard.
Yeah, my favorite Bush one was the one about fish. I think the human and the fish can live together. I just think it's such a
the human
thing.
being and the fish can coexist peacefully.
I just love that one. I think it's very, just to sidetrack on Bush.
My favorite, I was going to say, Ann, since you mentioned that, was when Bush said back during the first campaign in New Hampshire, I know how hard it is to put food on your family.
This has concrete imagery is what's good. I mean,
Exactly.
one of the reasons Obama and a lot of professors are boring is they speak in such abstractions that you don't have the attention span for it. There's no charm to it, whereas Bush's things. But another thing about Bush is that he made fun of himself, and so did his father. I mean, Bush went on Saturday Night Live. Strategery was written by Saturday Night Live to make fun of him, and he made fun of himself. And I think Palin also seems to have a kind of ability to laugh at herself, and there's a charm to that I think makes it more funny than it is for Obama, who seems to take himself pretty seriously.
I'd go about halfway there with you, and I think with Bush, yes, he could laugh at himself, which is, whether you feel it or not, is a very good good strategy, because, if people are laughing at you, laugh with them. You're in on the joke, you diffuse it. I'll tell you who couldn't do that at all was Bill Clinton, who is a president who, in my experience, has no known sense of humor. I mean, he just, he'll laugh if other people are laughing, but not if they're laughing at him. Yeah. And he's just not funny. But Palin, I think, is very, I find her very easily offended and touchy and indignant. She was always talking now about the lamestream media, and she does have this one line which she repeats a lot, which I actually find a really shocking thing to say, where she says, journalists who basically criticize her in a way she thinks unfair are betraying the troops. The people are fighting for American freedom, and the journalists who don't live up to the freedom by, in her view, writing negatively about her are in some way un-American. And I think that's such an offensive sentiment, and it just speaks to her sort of hypersensitivity and touchiness.
But now,
which Bush didn't have. I agree with you.
Do you really think that whenever she happens to be funny or wise, that it's accidental? Your subtitle is The Accidental Wit and Wisdom of Sarah Palin. And I thought there were some examples in here where you're sort of inviting the reader to laugh at her, but I think that she was clearly aware of the humor and meaning to be fun. Like, just to take an obvious one on page 17, if God had intended for us to eat animals, how come he made them out of meat? I mean, that's obviously a joke.
Yes, absolutely. Well, Dwight MacDonald, who's one of my favorite writers, once did a collection of parodies, and he categorized them as parodies of other people and parodies of yourself, and self-parodies were divided into intentional and unintentional. And I guess that is, it's supposed to be funny, but I think it may be a little bit of unintentional self-parody in that, the kind of, extreme pro-carnivore sentiment. But no, she meant that as a joke. Now, the other day when she said that, talking about her show that, it was really her Alaska reality show, that it was really keeping her on her heels, I think that was not intentional. I think she meant to say it was keeping her on her toes. And it is sort of funny when you take
maybe women are on their heels as they're wearing their stilettos. Maybe that. Do you think that there is a gender aspect to Palin? That there's something about the way she speaks? I mean, there used to be feminist research on the subject of in a different voice and so forth, that there was a different way that women have of expressing themselves. And do you ever wonder that maybe you're picking on a woman or you're making fun of some things about a woman and really it's going to backfire on you, and that a lot of women kind of identify with her, and there's something about the way she speaks that's feminine, that the people who like her really like and find charming, and that you're kind of being a little obtuse to miss, or mean-spirited, or even sexist to miss?
Well, I don't think there's any sexist dimension to that, and certainly, having made fun of Bushes for so long and other male politicians, I don't think there's anybody singling her out. I do think there is a kind of elitism, populism issue. When someone, and Bush did this too, but Palinism obviously is a bigger example of this, is developing her political base by attacking what she sees as an elite. Someone who publishes a book making fun of her is almost by definition part of that elite. And I certainly don't think a book like this does her any harm.
I kind of think
probably
her fans might like
does
it.
her some good. Yeah, I mean,
Yeah,
I
who do you
think,
really think would get this? I mean, I think a lot of people who, could be a gift for somebody who doesn't like Palin is like, joke gift. But as I was reading this, I think that people who like her would actually find this pretty amusing. Certainly has a picture of her on every page. I mean, part of it is the visual effect that she's very pretty. I mean, it's the whole thing. I mean, it's her whole presentation. I mean, I think some of these statements work better when you actually see video of her speaking, and they kind of lose something on paper. But you do make up for putting a picture of her on every page, at least.
Right. Well, we have the video on Slate. I agree with you. They're better if you see them. I don't hate Sarah Palin.
Mm-hmm.
I sort of enjoy her a lot, and this book really is in the category. I mean, I also write seriously about her as a columnist and political journalist
Mm-hmm.
from time to time, but this is sort of in the more in the entertainment category for me.
Yeah, I would think so.
But Anne, I got to ask you, aren't you? I thought you were going to defend Sarah Palin. Aren't we going to?
Well, here's a good. Well,
and here's some things you can defend.
Here's the thing about media is that. For example, I keep being used as a person to defend Sarah Palin on Blogging Heads, but I'm not particularly a Sarah Palin fan. I just end up, if someone else is really attacking her, I will defend her. I just feel it's sort of a lawyerly impulse of mine, or I just, I care about the fairness. So I'm really kind of in the middle. I'm not pro Sarah Palin at all. But let me cross-examine.
I guess in this context, she is the underdog. So great, you're sticking up for. But let
me cross-examine you on one thing in particular. Yeah. For example, on evolution, on page 46 of your book. Here it is. Yes, you quote her saying, "I didn't believe the theory that human beings, thinking, loving beings, originated from fish that sprouted legs and crawled out of the sea, or that human beings began as single-celled organisms that developed into monkeys, who eventually swung down from the trees." Now, you've taken that out of context from her book, and I have the book, and it's on page 217 of the hardback of Going Rogue. And if you look at that, you can see the context is, "I believed in the evidence for microevolution that geologic and species change occurs incrementally over time." And she's being interviewed and questioned, and your dad's a science teacher, and she says, then you know that, and she says yes, then you know that science proves evolution, and her answer is parts of evolution, but I believe God created us, and also that he can create an evolutionary process that allows species to change and adapt. Now, I think I'll bet the great majority of Americans believe that too, and that if politicians were questioned whether they accept that point, that most of them would tend to agree with that. I think that's what Catholics believe about evolution. So it's not a disbelief or an unscientific belief in evolution. It's the way most people coordinate religious belief with the scientific evidence. It's actually very solid and not ridiculous. So you've taken something out of context.
You're blurring two things. No, I read the book, and I actually don't think that's out of context. She does support teaching of so-called creation science. She's not a young Earth creationist who believes the Earth is only 5,000 years old, but she is it's a little like her point on global warming. She never comes out and says that I think global warming is a complete fraud and it's not happening. But she is kind of increasingly aggressive about her skepticism about it. And so she won't kind of come out and say, she's very careful in that part of the book that you quoted, she won't come out and say, I believe in creationism. But she will say, well, wait a minute. Evolution isn't really plausible, and I have a lot of doubts about it. And same thing with
no, I think she said that she thinks that God created everything, including the evolutionary process, and has some direction over it, and that especially in creating the human being, that there was something more to that it's not just part of all of the same evolution. Now, I think...
Well, when she says human beings didn't evolve from fish, she could have said she doesn't believe they evolved from monkeys. I mean, that's sort of a step closer to something that kind of puts you outside the pale of kind of respectable opinion. But, I think she's going farther than just saying she thinks God is behind the process of evolution.
Well,
she's
I read
questioning the process of evolution.
I would recommend people look at page 270. And also, I think, let's say you were to pin down all the people who are running for president, or pin down Obama and Bill Clinton and Hillary Clinton, and ask them that question really pointedly about evolution, and get them to try to coordinate that with the idea that they believe in God. Now, maybe some of them would admit that they don't believe in God, right? And it's all just the scientific theory of evolution. There's nothing more to it than that. But I think, first of all, even politicians that do not believe in God don't say it. I suspect Obama doesn't believe in God personally, but I don't know.
He's been kind of convincing otherwise. But I think the point is, Anne, I don't care what politicians believe personally. I care what's taught in schools, and I care that creationism, which is not science, but religion, is taught in some classrooms, and that's what Sarah Palin supports, and that's what I'm against.
Okay, well, a couple things there, and I actually teach a course in religion in the Constitution, so I'm really sensitive to this subject. Number one, I think that virtually all American politicians would claim to believe something very close to intelligent design. It's not creationism, it's intelligent design, which is what she's talking about, that there is
No, she doesn't. That phrase doesn't appear for a reason, because it's not what she believes. She doesn't think that God is the force behind Darwinian evolution. She's skeptical of Darwin's theory of evolution.
She said, I believe that God created us, and also that he can create an evolutionary process that allows species to change and adapt. There's something special about the human being. But I think if you really pin down most politicians, they would say something very close to that. Now, there's a difference between saying what you believe and saying what you think ought to be taught in school. And I think that there are a lot of people who think that when evolution is taught, that something additional ought to be said, that people who believe in God believe that God directs the process of evolution, or something like that, to just explain how people coordinate religion with the scientific theory. And now the Supreme Court's position on that.
So. Yeah. I mean, do you think creation science should get equal time? That's what she thinks.
No. Of course, I don't think that. But I just think that what she's saying.
Then what are you defending? That's not. I mean, her view. She's not at all saying that they should teach that some people believe that the belief in God is fully compatible with evolution, and that's not an unreasonable position.
But first of all, the part that you took out of context comes from something that's not about what should be taught in school. It's about just what she believes as she was going into the campaign. So I'm just saying that your quote is out of context.
It's really not out of context. It's a coherent statement about her view on evolution. She has other things to say about evolution, but that's her book, not my book.
Yeah, but I do think that the point you're bringing up now about what should be taught in schools is important, but that's not in either your quote on page 46 or what she's talking about in her book at page 217. So I'm defending her on that and making the point about taking things out of context and making her sound a little bit like more of an unscientific or know-nothing, a free-swinging person than she really did sound like in the full.
But Anne, I think I've made her sound more reasonable by not suggesting that she wants to feed this creationist propaganda to school children.
Right,
that's the really outrageous thing, which I didn't even get into.
Well, but is that a criticism of the book, that there's something outrageous that you didn't talk about, and you did talk about something that I think isn't really as outrageous if you look at it in the real context?
I mean, these are quotes of things she said, out of context would mean that it's somehow suggesting she believes something she doesn't, or the opposite of what she thinks. And I'm very careful with these. I mean, there are a lot of, just not to belabor this point, but there are a lot of these, Palinisms. It's the same with Bush, it was the same with Quayle, floating around on the internet that are spliced or inaccurate.
Yeah.
And I'm super careful to get these right and to try to be fair about them in the context of it being entertainment and being funny. And I just, it's. I don't mean to sound touchy myself about it, but I actually don't think that you've got a good example there of me taking something out of context.
There's something inherent in the methodology of taking things out of context in a way that makes them as funny as possible. I do the same thing when I'm blogging. Well, although I do link to the full context so anyone can get to that. I mean, and I think another one that I point out is on page 43. And a lot of them are about religion. I mean, I wonder if the book kind of depends on people not really getting the religion of someone who really feels religious. But some of these, like the one about God's plan, pray for our military men and women who are striving to do what's right. Also for this country's leaders, our national leaders, are sending them out on a task that is from God. Now, obviously, that's very inflammatory. That's what we have to make sure that we're praying for, that this is a plan and that plan is God's plan. Now, that's very muddled, but I think that if you're reading that intelligently, you are expected to understand that that's a reference to that quote that's attributed variously to Washington or Lincoln, that he was asked if God was on our side, and the answer is something like, we need to pray that we are on God's side. I think that old quote, that you're expected to know that and get that resonance, and so that there is that's what's missing from the context there is that the reader isn't or the hearer isn't bringing the knowledge, that she's actually referring to something that should be in our national consciousness.
Look, I love that quote, Anne, but I think that's the rejoinder to what she said. That's not what she said.
Well, I certainly agree that she garbled it, but I just wonder if there isn't a
She's
certain...
not referring to that, because I think, that's that line from Lincoln. I think Bush has used it, Obama's used it, everybody uses that line, whether is it actually not from Lincoln?
I looked it up in preparation. Yeah. It's also been attributed to Washington, and I think that there's some question whether it really is from Lincoln, but I think people tend to think Lincoln said it.
Right. But is she saying that the fact that, her view that the military is on a task or mission from God, that doesn't sound like a garbled version of that quote to me. It sounds like something that in a debate someone else would answer with the quote from Lincoln and say, we really don't know, we can't say what God's will is. All we can do is do what we think is right and hope we're on the right side.
Well, to me, that last sentence, after she said a task that is from God, I feel like she was trying to get around to correcting it in this odd syntax of hers when she says, that's what we have to make sure that we're praying for, that there is a plan, and that plan is God's plan. Not that God sent Bush out on a mission, but that we developed a mission and we need to try to get that in line with what God would want, what would be God's plan, or something like that. I think she's trying to coordinate it like that. And I think some of the problem that a lot of people have with her statements is that they don't come from the same mindset of having religion all interwoven in their life. And I think she seems to have a special, well, she said, and Lincoln himself did that, right? Brought God's second inaugural address and so forth. Lincoln had a way of interweaving God into the political statements that he made. Now, I can certainly see being very critical of that. I have a problem with mixing God and patriotism to try to get people all fired up about things. I think that's a big problem, actually. But leaders who can do it well can get a lot of power, and it's actually not very funny. And I think that one thing about Sarah Palin, it's easy to laugh at her for the way she mobilizes God in what she's saying, but I think that there's something beyond that that's very serious, which is that she's really communicating very effectively with a lot of Americans as she brings God into these speeches.
Oh, I agree with that. Absolutely. I think that's why she does it in the way she does and talks about it so much. But, there is this thing, and you were sort of getting this a minute ago, and this came up a lot with Bush, and people would sort of say, well, I know it sounds like he's saying this, but he's of course he's saying the opposite of this, and you know what he means, right? We all know what he means. And that's my point. It's funny. Someone who consistently says the opposite, whose literal words are consistently or fairly frequently the opposite of what they're trying to say, there's a comedy in that.
Yeah, I agree that it's funny, and I love to. I think everyone misspeaks. If you transcribe speech, you're going to get a lot of weird things, and you usually, if you read sympathetically those transcripts, you can tell what people really meant to say. It's frequently the case that you say exactly the opposite of what you meant to say. You say conservatives when you mean liberals. You say exactly the opposite. I've listened to my recorded speech many times, and I can't believe how many times I do that. I just think it's something that the mind does. And it is funny when people do it. It's funny to look at that and to study how people go wrong. And sometimes, it means something. They're really revealing something about their real thoughts. And sometimes it's just the glitch that means nothing. And to some extent it can be hilarious, and yet, but you could say, well, let's just try to make her look hilarious and be a sort of clownish figure of fun, and that will be a way of kind of taking her down. But she's been awfully resilient. From the moment she stepped on the national stage, people have been doing that to her, and she's still going strong. So this
when
sort
you
of
say going strong, the thing about, the thing that I think is a little bit unforgivable about Sarah Palin is not that she didn't know what she was talking about in 2008, because she didn't have national or international experience. And if she had been somewhat open and honest about her lack of kind of policy knowledge experience and said about learning those things, she would have had my full sympathy.
Yeah.
But instead, she's just been really proud about her ignorance and been made tremendous effort, it appears, to maintain it. I mean, she still fundamentally doesn't know what she's talking about, a whole range of domestic and international issues. And, that's what sort of sticks in my craw about her.
Well, I think most people don't volunteer themselves for political office, especially vice president or president, and because they feel like they can't possibly know enough to do this work. Nobody really is capable of being president. So it takes a certain kind of confidence, and most politicians really do have to have a way of finessing all the places where they don't know what they're talking about. They have to appear confident, and she was trying to do that, and I think she was trying to do what they all do, except that she had more ground to make up at that point, so there were some more ridiculous gaps. But really, that kind of bold confidence is inherent in the group of candidates for president. It's inevitably going to be the case. They use different techniques to kind of hide what they don't know, like Obama's professorial obfuscation approach. It's just
probably necessary. You're right, but
it's not.
She has a really extreme version of this kind of gap between confidence and knowledge or ability that kind of borders on some kind of narcissism. I think yes, you're absolutely right. You need that kind of excessive confidence, and there are going to be places where you don't know things and have to gloss them over.
Yeah.
But boy, her kind of eagerness to just kind of get out there and talk when she doesn't know what she's talking about is kind of shocking.
Yeah, so I know you have to go. Let me ask you one more question. This idea of getting out there and doing something when you don't know what you're doing. What about Bristol Palin going on Dancing with the Stars, and is she going to win the whole thing, and is that a travesty of dancing?
Boy, you're asking the wrong guy that question. I haven't seen it. Have you been watching it? Is she good dancer?
I never watched that show, but I watched because Bristol Palin was on, because I wanted to I have this defensive attitude toward the Palins. I didn't want to see people tearing her down, and I thought they were putting her out there just to make fun of her, so I ended up rooting for her. She was the big underdog. And, I think a lot of people are doing that. I think she's bringing them new ratings, and she's doing well in the votes. So it's a show where they calculate in the judges' score with the voters who call in. And the judges keep putting her at the bottom, and she keeps prevailing over these people who were more the judges' favorites. So it's actually been a kind of a funny parallel politics, democracy kind of a showing that goes along with the whole Palin enterprise.
It's funny, just as a last word, I think we've had politicians who have become celebrities by virtue of their political fame, but Palin and her family, to some extent, seems to me much more like celebrities who happen to be in politics, but who could easily be in another field. Yeah,
well, and now Sarah Palin has her reality show too, so they do seem like a reality show family, and they have all of these. They have a cast of thousands, not thousands, but they have a lot of people there ready to go. And there was the tearing apart of poor 16-year-old Willow Palin the other day because she wrote. She used the slang term on her Facebook page that polite people don't think is right.
Yeah, we had I thought a pretty fair and good piece about that in Slate.
Oh, good. Did you say you shouldn't be reading a 16-year-old's Facebook page?
It just said that this is Emily Bazelon wrote it, and she argued that basically this is what goes on in the world as teenagers, and don't pretend this is some kind of exception, and it's a real problem that teenagers are creating this sort of electronic trail that has the potential to dog them their whole lives, and we got to make mistakes like that without there being any permanent record.
I know. Yeah. What's in our electronic record, including pictures of us naked, is going to be haunting us for the rest of, human history.
Well, I don't mind a good TSA pat-down myself, but...
Okay, are you going for the grope, or you want to be seen naked or grope? What's your preference? You going for the grope?
Depends on the TSA agent, yeah.
I choose the grope over the being seen naked, but...
Yes, well, it's nice groping with you.
Okay, thanks for talking. Good luck with your book.
Thanks, bye-bye.